Good to see everybody tonight, and on a nice, beautiful, rainy Wednesday evening to come and spend some time and study from God's Word and to gain some wisdom as we've been examining this series out of the book of Proverbs called Wisdom Calls. And as we've mentioned on many occasions, this is a series that I'm kind of adapting as we go. That's based out of a book that Dr. Jeff Smith wrote, although I don't think he had his doctorate when he wrote the book, but I think anyway, I guess that's irrelevant in some senses. But I think it does come up because I've mentioned to you that you can look it up on Amazon, the book, and order a copy, and I think sometimes folks have been looking it up, and I don't think, it probably just says Jeff S. Smith on the cover. Oh, it does? Okay, so never mind. Ignore everything that I just said the last 2 or 3 minutes. So anyway, so you can find a actual copy of the whole book if you're interested, but I'm giving it to you in pieces. You're getting the whole book, you're just getting it one lesson at a time in that sense as we move through. And I appreciate Jeff being willing. When I reached out to him, I just talked to him about whether to buy a license or a bulk of the books to have for folks, and he just sent me a message that said, here, just use it. And so I appreciate his willingness to let us do that for our class period. If you would, let's bow our heads together, though, before we get into our study and share in a word of prayer together. Our Father in heaven, thank you for the day that you've given us and the blessings of life that you bestow upon us every single day. We're thankful and humbled by your grace and your love and your mercy for us. And as we've been studying through the wisdom literature of Proverbs, we just pray that you continue to give us an open heart and mind to be receptive to the message that you deliver through your word, and to encourage us to learn more and more of what your will and desire for us is, and how we can conduct ourselves and honor you through our lives. Guide us through our study tonight. And again, thank you for the wisdom of the Scriptures, and we pray this through Christ's name. Amen. So tonight, as you can see on the screen, our study comes out of Proverbs 16, verses 27 and 28 of that proverb, where the writer makes this statement: an ungodly man digs up evil, and it is on his lips like a burning fire. A perverse man sows strife, and a whisperer separates the best of friends. And I don't know how well we'll be able to kind of discuss all of those, but there's really three somewhat different kinds of things there, right? You've got an ungodly man that likes to do what? Yeah, he likes to dig up trouble, right? He knows there's something down there, and he likes to dig it up and kind of get it to the surface if he can. You've got a perverse man. He's the kind of guy that likes to do what? Yeah, right, but it's so strife, right? He likes to go around and just see if he can't nitpick some things enough to cause people to get into a little bit of a turmoil. And then there's the whisperer, right? This is the guy that kind of, hey, did you hear kind of guy, right? And he likes to even go as far as putting and pitting people that maybe were once close and put them and make them become adversaries. And that can create certainly challenges. So that's the text that we're dealing with this evening in our discussion. And our initial question, which we just kind of answered, was what kind of man sows strife and what separates the best of friends? And right, so it's those that ungodly, that perverse, that whisperer. That's the context of our discussion this evening. So let's dig into this and talk a little further about it. So the ungodly man, question 2 was, in our text, believes he is above what? And how do people convince themselves that they really aren't the cause of trouble? So what's he think he's above? And you kind of had to read the material Jeff put together to kind of get that direction. Okay, above the fray, we might say, or he's not really involved. He's just this outside observer that may say a few things as it relates to whatever the situation is, but it's not really his issue. It's not really his problem. He's not causing any of the difficulty. The problem really rests over there, even though he's the one doing what? Yeah, he's instigating it. He's stirring that. He's creating that strife. He's whispering behind people's backs in order to kind of stir it up. He's digging up trouble. He's being the catalyst and the instigator And then once he's created the problems and once the challenges begin, then he tries to step back and act like he didn't do anything, right? As if he has no culpability or responsibility at all as it relates to that. Let me share with you, if you had your materials, what Jeff wrote about that. He said, "The ungodly man thinks himself clever and somewhat above the fray, for he merely ignites the fire to watch others burn. He is a friendship arsonist." I thought that was an interesting description, wasn't it? He is a friendship arsonist, destroying people's relationships for some perverse reason. Perhaps he feels inferior or left out or just enjoys the spectacle. He is an ungodly man who digs up evil and sets friends or strangers against one another. And that's in that description. I love the way Jeff wrote that because it really kind of gets to the core of this kind of individual. But it's a pretty sad description, isn't it? And the problem is we let that kind of guy dictate and control and cause all kinds of, instead of realizing, acknowledging what kind of person this really is that's digging up this trouble or that's stirring strife or who is whispering behind people's backs. Rather than being honest about what kind of individual's really doing that, we just sit back sometimes also and just watch the fire that they put ablaze, so long as that fire's not where? Yeah, not touching me, right? As long as it's not my backyard, then I just kind of sit back and watch this fella destroy the lives of others. And that's just not, it's not a good way to be. And it's not a positive way to think about that. How do people then convince themselves that they really aren't the cause of trouble? What kinds of things do they tell themselves to make them think they're not really the part of the problem or cause of the trouble? And that was the second part of that question.
For the good of somebody else.
Yeah, I'm really trying to be helpful here by telling him what that guy, I believe, thinks about him, right? So he convinces himself that he's actually doing a good thing, and which he's dishonest about it, but yet he might convince himself of that.
It would have come out eventually anyway.
Yeah, so they rationalize it, right? Well, I'm not really stirring any trouble or causing any problems. People would have found out this anyway. I'm just letting people know what they would have learned in time. It's right, so we can rationalize it in those kinds of ways.
Do things like that, not so much for the opinion of other people, but they think that if they can bring them down, it raises them up.
Okay. So I think that is one of the things that people do. Sometimes people don't want to take in the work to grow and get better in a sense. And so if I don't want to grow, but I don't want other people to be ahead, then I got to start tearing people down. I want to bring them down where I am. And I think that does happen. I think a lot of times, whether it's jealousies, whether it's envies that's motivating it, laziness, or whatever it might be, I think it does happen a lot, Bob, where people, they're causing trouble because they're just trying to bring people down to their level for various reasons.
I think it's possible that a person may not even realize that they're doing it.
Yeah.
And they can deny it and deny it to themselves.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think there may be two kinds of people here. That there are those who are very willfully, actively trying to cause trouble. And there could be some who in their ignorance, for lack of a better word, may not fully appreciate the difficulty and trouble they're causing. I think that person's reachable, right? That individual you might be able to have a more reasonable conversation with and go, hey, do you realize that this was the result of what you said or how you behaved or what you did? That person might be reachable. The guy that's kind of just troublemaking to cause trouble, he's harder to reach. And yet the sad difficulty of that, though, is whether willfully or in ignorance, the end result doesn't change, right? And that's the sad part about that. So we might want to be careful and cautious that we not even be found causing these kinds of things in ignorance. Because even though I may not have intended it, I may not have meant it, I wasn't but the blaze is going anyway, and that should give us all pause. But I think that does happen. Go ahead, Bob.
It said that people who aren't happy don't want anybody else to be happy.
Yeah. I'm not happy unless everybody around me is as miserable as I am, right? And I think that happens a lot, where people cause trouble because maybe they feel like they've been denied certain levels of happiness, and if they haven't been able to have it, then nobody should have it. And absolutely, folks can stir up difficulty and problems that way as well.
Inflated egos.
Yeah. When we think too highly of ourselves, sometimes, again, that gets it back to that selfish side of things. And maybe I want what others have, or I'm jealous or envious of them, and I stirring up trouble as it relates to that. Any other thoughts you may have had in answer to that question? So, the third question, and it related to one of the readings for the week. So what did Jezebel do to get what she, and I put Ahab in parentheses there because he was the catalyst, and then she caused the trouble. But what did she and Ahab want? First of all, what did they want? Yeah, they wanted Naboth's vineyard. And it's interesting, right? Because there's lots of history there, and I want to be careful not to overgeneralize it, but Ahab's initial reproach to the vineyard was probably could be considered fair, right? Because he went to Naboth and he said, what? I'll pay you for it, or I'll give you, and not just a piece of land. I think if you go back and text, I'll give you a better one. I'll give you because this one's right beside my property. So if you'll give me this, I want this one because it's in close proximity to me. So if you'll give me that, I'll either pay you more than it's worth, or I'll give you another vineyard that may be considerably distant from here, but I'll give you a different vineyard that's even better than this one. Just let me have this one. What was Naboth's response to that, by the way? No, for what reason? Yeah, and the law, right? The Old Testament law required that the land be handed down from generation to generation, and he did not want the responsibility of thinking that he basically sold off a family heritage that was supposed to continue to be shared among his family. So Ahab, initial approach, fair. Naboth, a man of integrity, says, I can't sell off our family heritage. And Ahab goes home and does what? He pouts or he cries, right? He goes home and he cries. And Jezebel comes in, and she sees this pitiful sight. And what's she say to him? You're the what? Get up. You're the king. What is wrong with you? That's what she said. You're the king. And then, so, okay, give her half credit for 2 seconds. Right? He's a grown man. You're the king of the people. You shouldn't be sitting here crying and pouting. But the problem is she went one step beyond just that. She says, if you want the vineyard, just take it. You're the king. Just take it. Well, how am I going to take it? How am I going to find a path? And so then what did she do? Okay, so how did she have him killed? Okay, so she stirred up trouble. And that's the reason why I added this text to our reading schedule. Let me share with you 1 Kings chapter 21, verses 8 through 10. So she wrote letters, and her husband, he is a pitiful sight, actually, when the more you think about it. But anyway, so she wrote letters in Ahab's name, and sealed them with his seal, and sent the letters unto the elders and to the nobles that were in his city dwelling with Naboth. And she wrote in the letter, saying, proclaim a fast, and set Naboth on high among the people, and set 2 men, sons of Belial, which means sons of... Right? These are evil men. Get a couple of bad guys. And so elevate Naboth, call this solemn feast, this fast rather, and put him in a position where people can see him. Put a couple of evil guys next to him, and at the right moment, they're going to do what? Yeah, they're going to start stirring the trouble for Naboth. They're going to stir up trouble by bearing witness against him, saying, "Thou didst blaspheme God and the king," and then carry him out and stone him that he may die. And so Jezebel didn't care anything about any kind of moral fabric whatsoever. But would it look good if the king just went and killed Naboth and took his vineyard? No, that's not. It's not going to look good to do that. So she basically has the elders of the city do her bidding. And so they call the solemn fast, and then don't just do that, but make sure he's in a prominent spot where people can see and hear this false witness. Then here come the evil men to bring the false witness. And now you've got justification, right? That's all it took, right? In the mouth of two witnesses is all it took to put a man to death. He's guilty of that which is worthy of death, according to the law, blasphemy against God. You've got your two witnesses, and put him to death. And I thought it was important for us to get that imagery, because that's kind of the kind of person we're dealing with here in the Proverbs. They don't want to get their own hands dirty in the mix, right? They don't want to get themselves in the mix, but they want what they want. And they're willing to stir up other people and get them all stirred and worked up and let them cause the problem and the calamity. I look like I'm as innocent as the day is long. All I did was suggest that the elders call a fast, as all I did, in theory. But I also gave them the plot against Naboth and let somebody else do that work for me. It still happens. Good, Will.
To make it look like it came from Ahab. I'm over here, I'm innocent.
Yeah, it is interesting. She didn't sign it by her own name. She used Ahab's seal to give it some veracity from the king, but also it even tries to in some ways distance herself from that circumstance. But that's how people work. And sometimes when we hear trouble and we see difficulties and we see problems occurring among people and strife, don't be so quick to start jumping on sides here and pause and consider, how did this happen? What's going on here? Who's stirring all this? Why are they stirring all this? But the truth is, we've been kind of behaviorally programmed to kind of we like the negative, right? We say we don't. But how many of you watch the news tonight? I hope none of you, right? But we kind of relish in it, right? And if they were talking fluff pieces all night long on the news, you'd probably block it out. But when that little tidbit comes up of negativity, it draws our attention. And they know that to be true, by the way, because from a marketing standpoint, that's why they fill the airwaves with it, because they know that it attracts the attention of people. And if you've ever noticed, and in our modern media world that we live in, have you ever seen some kind of catastrophic headline, and then you click to read what it's about, and you find out it's almost irrelevant to the headline that was there, but they got your attention with some negative, hateful, whatever thought. People still do that. It comes in different forms in modern world, but people still do that. They enlist others, and they're not completely innocent here, by the way. Particularly the two men are willing to bear false witness, and the men willing to find those two men that were willing to bear false witness. There's a culpability across the board here. But all of it happens because somebody was willing to kind of stir up the strife and challenge and cause the harm just because they wanted something. And that's one of the other reasons I think people do this. Generally speaking, people sometimes will cause strife and confusion and hurt because they want something. Either they want attention, either they want the recognition that they thought they should have gotten that somebody else received, and so I gotta hurt them in some ways. Lots of thought processes go through people's minds that causes them to stir up this kind of strife and challenge.
The elders did it because they wanted to be in the good graces of Ahab.
My guess is they figured there was no other way. In their minds, they probably thought, I don't have a choice. They did have a choice, right? You've always got that moral choice. But in their minds, I'm sure they thought, well, this was signed and sealed by Ahab the king. I don't have any choice. This is what I need to do. And I'm sure some of that went through their minds.
Who was the, now nobody's names. Uriah.
Yeah. Bathsheba's husband.
Right.
Yeah.
If the king says, well, what'd you do that for? Just say, oh, and by the way,
Yeah.
and he'll be okay.
Yeah. And those folks are always trying to find ways, right, to get what they want, and they don't care who they involve to cause the trouble in order to get there. David's another example of that.
From the fall, was to be handed down. At his death, there apparently wasn't any other family to take it before the King Ahab took it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. None that had power to fight the king. You know what I mean? That's how I see that. Yeah. It is kind of interesting, right? Because that's the argument he makes, and if he makes that argument, you would assume he knew who that was supposed to be. But I think this was a way for the king just to kind of get the one guy that could situate that out of the picture. But it is interesting to think about. So the next question was, what can a little fire kindle? Out of James chapter 3. We keep coming back to this text in various when we look at these various proverbs. But what can a little fire kindle? Yeah. So verse 5 of James chapter 3. Even so the tongue is a little member and boasteth great things. Behold how great a matter a little fire kindleth. What great matter a little fire kindleth. There have been a lot of catastrophic fires that were caused by what began as something small that maybe didn't get found initially, was allowed to burn for a while, was allowed to create more and more difficulties as it progresses. And I think the imagery of James in our discussion tonight helps us appreciate that doesn't take a lot sometimes, right? All it takes sometimes is just that little spark. You don't have to get knee deep in all the troublemaking in order to create the trouble. You just give somebody something to think about, right? You just give them a little piece of thought, some information, maybe accurate, may not be accurate. You decide what you think about that. And you all, I've all experienced where some little thought doesn't take long for that to be completely misrepresented by the time it hits the end of the road, and maybe all kinds of hurt and harm happen to folks along the way. And so we need to be careful because great difficulties can come out of small little things that we might think are innocent or have no real deep meaning or challenge to them. Obviously they can come. Notice what Jeff wrote in the material. He said, the ungodly man goes about like an arsonist, as we've already noticed before, setting little fires with his whispering and suggestions until something ignites and trouble results. The sad reality is some folks that behave this way are not content until the fire's lit. And if they can't light it with you, they'll do what? Just go on to the next person, right? And we'll go on to the next person, or we'll go on to the next situation. And what I think the wisdom we need to have, number one, don't be that guy, obviously. That's the most obvious of all those things. But we need to be open and honest and watchful about guys who do that, about people who do that. If we see and witness and have and begin to perceive that they're trying to cause trouble. And they're not going to be done until they've talked to somebody along the chain that will let them use them to ignite the fire. They'll just continue to go. And that's what that whispering is about. You keep going to one ear, to the next ear, to the next ear, to the next ear, until somebody is willing to jump on board with what you're trying to create and the challenges and difficulties you're trying to present, and they begin to line up with you. It doesn't take a lot to create a lot of trouble. One misunderstanding, one misquote, one moment of not considering others better than ourselves, one moment of impatience, right? It's all it takes. And that's why I think this lesson is important in this discussion we've been having out of the wisdom of the Proverbs, because once the fire's burning, it's burning, right? And it's hard to put out. And once it starts to engulf people's lives and their reputations, and it's hard to stop. And we've got to be careful that we're not getting involved and lending our voices and behaviors towards situations where the truth is we're setting ablaze something that may never get put out or may take years to figure out. Be careful because of that.
Little leaven.
Yeah, a little leaven of the whole. Yeah, that's all it takes, right? And that's good and bad. If you're talking about positive things, a little leaven can help, but a little bad can cause a lot of hurt along the way as well. Jeff added this in that conversation. He is an ungodly man who spreads stories, true or not. That's why I wanted to come back and make sure I put this on the screen for us to think about out of his material. Sometimes we justify our actions by saying, well, it's what? It's true. But just because it's true doesn't make it my business, right? Just because it's true doesn't mean I'm the one who should be sharing that information. Just because it's true is not the sole authoritative argument that needs to be considered before we actually begin to say something that could hurt or harm others. I'm careful, and I don't want to dig too far down that road because it's actually going to come up again in a future lesson, and I think I'll cover more of that conversation then. But we've got to be careful. Just because it's true, it doesn't necessarily mean that we should be getting involved. True or not, that serve to engender strife and hurt feelings and to separate friends or create enemies. You know, earlier we talked about maybe somebody's wanting to bring other people down, or when we were kids in school, you probably encountered somebody that maybe said, well, if you're going to be their friend, I'm not going to be your friend if you want to be my friend, right? But you know where it's sad to see that at? Adults. Adults. It's one thing, right? It's one thing for children because they may still need to be taught and they may need some education about how they should properly behave towards others, and they ought to get along and be congenial with everybody, and they may have some things to learn. But boy, when you see adults behaving that way and trying to drive wedges between individuals, and a lot of times, well, I don't like him, and so if you like him, then I'm not, and I don't like you, and it's just silliness, but yet adults sometimes are worse. Sometimes adults are worse than children when it comes to that. And maybe it's just because it looks worse when adults behave like children. But it happens. People separate friendships and cause troubles in families, and you name it, right? And here's what I thought was important, and again why I wanted to share and make sure we read it together. Speaking of this ungodly man, Jeff wrote, he may read the Bible daily. He may fast twice a week. He may give as he's been prospered. But if his tongue is like a match, he is only an ungodly man whom Christ does not know, a worker of iniquity. And that's that conversation in Matthew 7, verses 21 through 23. Yeah, exactly. And a lot of times, people justify the way they act and behave and things they say about others because, well, I go to church every Sunday and I read my Bible daily and I give of my means every time the collection plate is passed around and I have my regular spot in the worship assemblies, and we give ourselves credit for all these things and in an effort to justify our bad behaviors as if God was going to put us in the scales of what good and bad that I did, and I'm just going to keep enough good to outweigh the bad so that God will give me credit for it. And it isn't simply not going to work that way. And too often we try to justify our bad behaviors based on what we think we've added up as good behaviors in the process. Be careful. We can be up, but all kinds of good things, positive things, but if we're stirring strife and challenges in others, it's not beneficial. So the next question, many are willing to lie to receive what? I use Matthew 28 was the reading text for that. Money, right? A lot of people will stir up a lot of trouble when their wallet's involved, right? When money is involved, it can get ugly among people. And the strife and difficulties and hurt can often occur out of money situations. In that circumstance, those soldiers, those Roman soldiers, what did they do? Okay, well, so they come, number one, let me back you up just for a second. So they come to whom after Jesus has been raised from the dead? And they were witnesses of, by the way. Right. So they come to the chief priest. Did they even answer to those chief priests? No, with the exception of maybe you might be able to argue, well, they were the ones that Pilate, if you remember, he said, I'll give you a guard. You've asked for a guard to go guard the tomb. Here you go. But those Roman soldiers, those weren't Jewish soldiers. Those were Roman soldiers. They answered to Pilate and to Rome, not to the Jewish leadership. But they went to the chief priests because they knew the truth of what had happened with Jesus. You give us some money and we'll tell a lie. By implication, in some ways, don't give us any money and we'll tell people what really happened. But what's interesting about this that I wanted us to pick up on was, what's the lie, by the way? Okay, so while we were asleep, the disciples came and stole the body. Chief priest said, you tell anybody that asks you, that's what happened. Why would that be their line of lying? Why that? Why that particular specific statement?
They didn't want anyone to believe that he had resurrected.
Okay, so that's the overall reaching why the Jews, and I may not be asking the question as well as I should, but why that specific lie? Let me ask it this way. Have we heard that lie prior to this moment? Yes. When the Jews went to talk to Pilate about securing the tomb, They said to him, listen, if you don't secure the tomb, his disciples will come in and steal his body, and then you're going to have a bigger problem on your hands than you already do when it comes to Jesus. They lit the fire long before they ever had to bribe the Roman soldiers to then go and continue to spread the fire that they had already set. And I think sometimes that's the way people work. They plant a seed of contention. They plant a seed of strife. They plant the potential of a problem, right? Oh, I don't know that, and so that could create this, and they start planting that seed of contention and strife, so that when and if that circumstance might actually raise itself, and you're trying to wonder about how that's going to go, well, that little fire's already been planted inside your mindset. You're already thinking in one direction because somebody already planted that seed. And it's easier then to be taken in by that deceit and lie. This lie works because they've already told Pilate this. So when the Roman soldiers go and say, sir, we apologize. We fell asleep. Yes, we fell asleep on duty, but we fell asleep. And while we were asleep, his disciples came and stole the body. Pilate goes, yeah, I guess I was warned that might have happened. And here goes the lie from that seed that was planted. Be careful, because what might seem innocent and benign in the moment might actually be somebody planting the seed of strife, sedition, and challenge and hurt that may crop itself up or present itself later. May not be in the moment that the actual strife or contentions cause, but somebody might be just planting a little seed, and then you witness something, you go, oh, maybe that's what that guy had told me about a couple weeks ago that might, see how that works? Be careful, because we can get pulled in sometimes into believing all kinds of things, hurtful things, contentious things, all because somebody was slick enough to plant a small seed of thought into our mindset. And so then ultimately, why would the chief priests want the soldiers to lie concerning the resurrection of Jesus?
Believe that he did resurrect.
Right. So if I can convince them that his body was stolen away, verses 12 through 13 in Matthew 28, I can cause contention among people what they actually believe about this Jesus of Nazareth. And if I can give them a plausible idea, well, the Roman soldiers said, it's got to be accurate, right? Roman soldiers said that while they were asleep, that they must have come in and stole his body. It seems plausible. And that fire goes. Go ahead, Amy.
If people believed in that, then there would be no reason for the chief priest to even have a position anymore.
Yeah. And so all that contention and problems that they stirred, they seem to be able to escape any accountability for it, seemingly. I wonder, how folks could be so deeply asleep on guard that could happen. My thought, and obviously it's just a lie, so you're trying to rationalize how they thought, but how could they be witness to something that happened if they were asleep? If I was asleep, well, you'd think, well, that would have been the end of the conversation. You can't tell me anything, because how could you be a witness to something if you were asleep when it happened? And there's lots of little pieces that you can think about when it comes to that.
Think that maybe these soldiers came to tell the priests this, hey, the guy you just put to death, he did raise. And they were coming maybe with an honest heart to them. I mean, it didn't take much to turn them around.
Yeah.
But
and it's possible. It's possible. The fact that the end result kind of tells us at least where their heart ended, irregardless of where it might have began. But that's certainly possible.
It says they came and reported all the things that had happened.
Yeah. So let me share another example with you. It was part of your reading, as our class is going to wind down here. But in Acts chapter 24, that's that scene, right? Paul's been brought in, and they hire whom? Tertullus, right? He's the Johnny Cochran of does that even work with anybody? Right? He's the Johnny Cochran of his day. Okay? And so he comes in, and what's the first thing he does, by the way? He flatters Felix, right? Oh, you're so awesome. But it's interesting. Let me just quickly, because I asked you what did he say about Paul? I just want you to notice what he said, and I kind of put it in yellow to make it jump off the page a little bit at you. So he said, "For we have found this man a pestilent fellow." Boy, I hope I never have to go to jail for being a pest, because that is, think about that. If that's all it takes to be in prison, we may all be in trouble sometimes. But that's what he said. He's a pest. Then he gets more serious. He's a mover of sedition. Okay? You don't want that going on in your backyard that you're governing. You don't want sedition going on. He's a mover of sedition among all the Jews throughout the world. Not just in your own backyard, Felix, everywhere. And he's a ringleader. He's not just a member of the sect of the Nazarenes. He's the ringleader of these guys. You want to know who's causing all this trouble with this Nazarene you're hearing about? Here he is. That's what Tertullus says. He's the ringleader. Who also hath gone about to profane the temple, whom we took and would have judged according to our law, but the chief captain Lysias came upon us, and with great violence took him away out of our hands, commanding his accusers to come unto thee, by examining of whom thyself mayest take knowledge of all these things whereof we accuse him. And the Jews assented, saying that these things were so, or they said, Amen. Amen, right? It's amazing how Tertullus was able to just subtly accuse Paul of certain things, hoping that maybe one of them would what? Well, one of them would stick. That's how the ungodly, causer of strife and sedition and challenges works. He'll just keep throwing morsels out there until somebody takes the bait. Okay, he's a pestilent fella. Maybe Felix goes, I don't know. Is that really? Are we really here to talk about a guy that's a pest? Okay, he's also, I think he's a little bit of a mover of sedition among the Jews. He's causing trouble among the Jews everywhere. Yeah, maybe he got my interest. Oh, he's also a ringleader of this new sect of the Nazarenes. These folks that have been following this Jesus of Nazareth, he's the ringleader of that movement. Oh, I don't know whether I want a movement inside my jurisdiction, right? Morsel by morsel, until something sticks. And that's the way these folks do it. And we have time to deal with tonight, but Paul basically says what at the end of this narrative? I didn't do any of those things. In fact, he says, I came up for the feast, right? Which, I don't have time to run this rabbit hole. But what feast would that have been? Whose feast would that have been? Maybe that's a better way I'm trying to drive at here. Been Jewish feast. After the days of the resurrection. Paul's coming home. He came home to Jerusalem because the feasts were still going on. He said, I behaved myself. I came home. He said, I came home to be around while the feast was going on, and nobody found me misbehaving in the temple. You can't find one witness. He said, they could find that I misbehaved in the temple during the feast time. And he said, the only thing that you might be able to accuse me of is I do worship the God of heaven through Jesus, the Christ, in the manner that they call a heresy. But that's the only thing, Paul says, as he defends himself from these little snippets of things hoping to cause some kind of contention and strife for Paul. That's how people work. And to end our class tonight, I just want to impress upon your minds, be watchful for that in your life. Not just from a perspective of what you say or do, where you might be causing trouble. But that's one thing. But be open and honest about what others might be trying to kindle through you and how they may be baiting you to get involved in some problem or contention or strife or challenge or hurt. They're trying to persuade you to get involved when the best thing you could do maybe is to what? Stay out of it and walk away. I promise you, I'll dig down that rabbit hole a little further in a future study. It's going to come back up here in a week or two within our studies. We will get to a chance, hopefully, to talk about that. And thank you all, including the classes that came upstairs for, well, you didn't give me the extra minutes. I took them, but thank you for letting me do that.